A 16-year-old girl walking home from the library had her dignity ripped away when her hijab was torn off in front of a stunned crowd. The officer behind it, Mark Reynolds, carried the arrogance of a man convinced his badge placed him above accountability. But what he never imagined was that the girl's uncle was none other than the city's police commissioner, and his quiet fury would change everything. Just wait until you hear how this confrontation ended and why justice, at last, came crashing down. Saturday afternoons in Atlanta usually carried a gentle rhythm: children playing on the sidewalks, neighbors chatting on porches, and the hum of cars rolling past. For 16-year-old Aisha Johnson, it was a day like any other. She had just finished studying at the library, a place she loved for its quiet and safety, and now she walked home with her notebook pressed close to her chest. The air was warm, and a soft breeze tugged at the edges of her long skirt. Her hijab framed her face neatly, the pale blue fabric carefully tied by her mother that morning. To Aisha, wearing it wasn't simply routine, it was her statement of identity, her bond with her family, and a shield of comfort in a world that often made her feel out of place. She walked with calm steps, unaware that within seconds her life would fracture into a moment she would never forget. The low rumble of a police cruiser crept up behind her. She noticed the shadow first, long, rectangular, crawling over the pavement as the car slowed down. Her stomach tightened. She turned slightly, only to see Officer Mark Reynolds in the driver's seat, his gaze fixed on her. Everyone in the neighborhood knew his reputation, a man quick to anger, with eyes that seemed to search for trouble even where none existed. Without rolling down his window, he swung open the door and stepped out, his boots striking the asphalt with a weight that made Aisha's breath catch. He barked out something about suspicious behavior, his voice sharp, echoing down the quiet street. Confusion flashed across Aisha's face. Suspicious? She had a backpack with 2 library books and her school ID? That was all. The moment stretched painfully. Bystanders, an older woman walking her dog, a pair of teenagers across the street, stopped and watched. The air thickened, silence broken only by the rustle of leaves. Aisha opened her mouth to respond, but before a single word could escape, it happened. Reynolds' hand shot forward. With one sudden, forceful motion, he grabbed the edge of her hijab and yanked it from her head. Gasps rippled through the street. Someone dropped their grocery bag. A phone camera tilted upward, now recording with shaky hands. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the entire block inhaled and forgot how to breathe again. Aisha's body stiffened, the world around her blurred. She clutched at her now bare head instinctively, as though trying to hold on to something that had just been ripped away. The evening air, once gentle, now felt harsh and intrusive against her uncovered hair. Inside her chest, her heart hammered with disbelief. It wasn't just fabric, it wasn't just an object. In that instant, what was torn away was her dignity, her sense of belonging, her safety. She felt stripped not only of her scarf, but of respect itself. The humiliation struck deeper than the physical sting, and as her hands trembled pulling the scarf to her chest, her mind screamed a single thought. This is not about rules. This is about me, about who I am. Aisha didn't move at first. Her feet felt glued to the pavement, as if her body refused to accept what had just happened. Her hands clutched the scarf against her chest, trembling so badly she could hardly hold it. Her lips parted, and in the softest voice, barely above a whisper, she asked, "Why me? What did I do?" The words were fragile, almost childlike, yet they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. The world around her tilted. Voices from the crowd, the bark of a dog, the distant hum of cars, all became muffled, like she were underwater. The shame pressed down, heavier than her backpack, heavier than the stares of strangers she could feel burning into her skin. People began to gather. A woman in her 30s raised her phone high, recording every second with her hand shaking in disbelief. 2 teenagers muttered angrily to each other, their faces pale with shock. An older man shouted, "That's enough, leave her alone." Others murmured, their voices rising in protest. But Officer Reynolds only stood taller, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with disdain. He sneered, his voice cutting through the air. "We don't need your kind hiding under rags." The words struck harder than the action itself. The cruelty wasn't hidden, it wasn't subtle, it was raw, meant to wound. Aisha's shoulders shook. She tried to make herself smaller, folding inward, clutching the scarf as if it could protect her now that her dignity had been torn away. The sight pierced the hearts of the bystanders. They saw not a stranger, not just a girl on the street, but a child, young, bright, undeserving of such humiliation. One woman covered her mouth, whispering, "She's just a kid." Another man muttered, "This isn't right, this isn't who we are." Yet despite their outrage, fear pinned them in place. Their anger boiled, but none dared to step forward, caught between conscience and authority. And so the crowd stood frozen, their phones raised like shields, their voices rising like sparks. Each witness felt her pain as if it were their own, a young black Muslim girl singled out, shamed and diminished for nothing more than existing. Compassion grew heavier in their chests, and with it, a dangerous fire, the kind of outrage that doesn't stay silent forever. The video spread faster than wildfire. Within an hour, it was on every social platform, replayed thousands of times. Strangers shared it with captions filled with disbelief and fury. "This is unacceptable. She's just a kid. How can this still happen?" The image of Aisha standing frozen, clutching her hijab to her chest, became a symbol of something larger than one cruel act. It became proof of a system's failure. At home, the Johnson family was in pieces. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, hands covering her face, tears slipping between her fingers. Her voice shook as she repeated, "She didn't deserve this. She didn't do anything wrong." Her father paced the room in silence, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every instinct told him to protect his daughter, yet against the weight of authority, he felt stripped of power. The house, usually filled with laughter, was heavy with grief and helplessness. But while despair gripped her parents, another force was stirring elsewhere. Across town, in an office lined with polished wood and framed commendations, Commissioner David Johnson watched the same video on his screen. Aisha's uncle, the highest-ranking officer in the city. He didn't weep, he didn't shout. His fury was quieter, sharper, the kind that freezes the air. As the video looped, he leaned forward, his jaw tightening with every second. His voice finally broke the silence, low but shaking with restrained power. "That man dishonored my niece, and worse, he dishonored this badge." The words carried more than family pride. They carried the weight of every oath taken, every uniform worn, every expectation that officers stand for protection, not humiliation. Viewers who heard his words, later replayed on the evening news, felt the storm gathering. The outrage was no longer only about Reynolds. It was about a system that allowed men like him to wear a uniform unchecked. The audience's anger peaked, not just for Aisha's sake, but for the principle itself. The stage was set, and the city braced for what came next. Morning came heavy with tension. Outside the police headquarters, news vans lined the street, cameras already pointed at the entrance. Reporters whispered into microphones, their words sharp with anticipation. The video of Aisha had shaken the city overnight, and now everyone waited to see what justice would look like in daylight. Inside, Commissioner David Johnson sat behind his desk, the polished wood reflecting the faint tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from tightly controlled fury. In front of him lay a file marked with Reynolds' name, the pages already prepared. Johnson's expression was unreadable, but his silence carried the weight of a storm about to break. The door opened. Officer Mark Reynolds stepped inside, still in uniform. He wore the same smirk he often carried, the smirk of a man who believed his badge was a shield, who believed authority would protect him no matter what. His confidence faltered when he saw who sat at the desk, For the first time, hesitation flickered in his eyes. There were cameras positioned discreetly in the corners of the room, rolling quietly. This wasn't just an internal meeting. This was accountability on record. Johnson's voice cut through the air like thunder. "You violated her rights. You disgraced this department, and you will never wear this badge again." Each word struck like a hammer, echoing off the walls. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, the smirk gone, his jaw tight. His hand twitched at his side, but there was nowhere to hide. Johnson picked up his pen. With a single deliberate motion, he signed the papers. The sound of the pen slamming down onto the desk was louder than any gavel. Suspension turned into termination, final, irreversible. Reynolds' face drained of its false confidence. The man who once sneered in the street now stood stripped of authority, powerless in front of the very system he thought would shield him. Outside, the news spread instantly. Cameras flashed, reporters' voices rose, headlines rolled across screens. Officer fired after hijab incident. Commissioner delivers swift justice. The story was no longer just about cruelty. It was about accountability. And then, through the doors of headquarters, Aisha appeared with her uncle at her side. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't broken. Standing tall, scarf once again wrapped proudly around her head, she walked past the cameras with quiet strength. The crowd saw it. The viewers at home felt it. She was no longer just a victim of humiliation. She was a symbol of resilience. Vindication rippled through the audience. Justice had struck, not with anger in the streets, but with the very weight of the institution that once allowed injustice to pass. The man who thought he held power had been undone by his own arrogance, and the girl he tried to diminish stood taller than ever.